No, great to see you again.
Yes, and you. So I think for the purposes of this discussion, what we'll do is we just start with an introduction. So maybe, Rob, you can introduce yourself and introduce Notary Pro. Then I'll talk a little bit about legal wills, and then we can get into why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, perfect. So great to be with you again. So my name is Robert Onley. Pardon me, I'm the founder and CEO of NotaryPro Technologies. So we are a national network of notary publics located all across Canada, as well as operating Canada's first and leading online notary public and virtual commissioner service. So we have a really simple web app that lets you meet with a notary public in seconds and get your document digitally notarized. And then we're working on a number of other cool projects and features that are going to be rolling out in the coming days, including this. And we're really excited about that as we continue to scale and grow our company.
And when was Notary Pro founded? How long have you been going now?
Yeah, so first started off the side of my desk in 2016 when I was a junior lawyer working in Ottawa, and then incorporated in 2018 and started under the brand and the banner of Notary Pro in the fall of 2018. So we've been operating sort of in its current state for the last better part of 5 years, and then really scaled up, I would say, in the last 3 years, particularly when the pandemic hit.
Right. That was perfect timing for you, the pandemic, for sure. Yep. And then myself, I'm Tim Hewson, one of the founders of LegalWills. We've been actually going since 2000, so we're in our 23rd year. And our mission was always to just remove the barriers to preparing a will and other estate planning documents. So we wanted to make it convenient and make it affordable. That was the two most important things, convenience and affordability. We felt that everybody should have a will. Most people don't have a will, and today, even now, 65% of people don't have a will in place. Power of attorney and living will is probably even lower numbers. So even though we've been on this quest for 23 years, we haven't, to be honest, moved the needle that much. We're still at 65% of people not having a will in place. But doing partnerships like this with Notary Pro is just another one of these moves to removing the barriers. So let me get into what exactly we're doing here. So we have one of the steps in preparing a will is obviously stepping through our service, kind of like using tax software. You answer all of the questions, you have your document at the end, and then there's still a little bit of a friction point, because what happens is the person then has their document in front of them. It's complete, but that is not a legal document. So what they need to do at that point is download it as a PDF file, then print it on their printer, if they have a printer, and then find two witnesses. Not everybody has two witnesses, so they need to find two witnesses who are not beneficiaries within the will. So it can't be their kids serving as the witnesses. So they need to find two witnesses and then sign it in the presence of those two witnesses. Those two witnesses then sign, and then optionally also get those witnesses to sign an affidavit of execution to get that document notarized. So we have certainly found that the first 80% of that process, getting that document complete and in the person's hands, has been quite smooth. But then that last 20% has been a real barrier to people. And that's why when we saw Notary Pro and your virtual witnessing, we wanted to try and, what we were doing to that point is saying, you know what, contact Notary Pro. They have a solution for you. You can go and get your document notarized and witnessed with Notary Pro. So go and contact Notary Pro. But whenever you're in a situation where somebody's online and you're asking them to go and find another service provider and go off and do something else, they're not going to go and do it. So what we wanted to do is really make that seamless, make it a one button. Okay, now I've finished the document. Now I want to get it witnessed. So that's why we came to you, and that's what we built into the Legal Wills service. I don't know, Rob, if you want to talk a little bit specifically about virtual witnessing and how we can now get our document and send it over to you, schedule that appointment, and get that document witnessed.
Yeah, no, so I mean, what you've described is really that full process from end to end. I mean, it's quite overwhelming for the average individual, and part of our ultimate mission at Notary Pro is to simplify and humanize notary public, legal, and paralegal services. Now, we're really only talking right now about notary public services, but what we do through virtual witnessing is we make it as easy as possible to actually sign your will validly and legally and in accordance with the law. And I can explain kind of what that looks like. But through this partnership, what we're doing is eliminating that burden for anyone who's coming through the LegalWills website to complete that final 20%. That process of actually meeting with someone, having the document, your will, and your powers of attorney. I'm going to jump back and keep it brief, but what we allow individuals to do now is they've completed their will through the LegalWills platform, and then through our new integration, which is directly connecting the two websites, people can then immediately book the virtual witnessing service. And what that means is they will meet with a licensed legal professional, in our case, a paralegal here in Ontario. They'll meet with them via video call, just like we're doing right now, and they will have their will printed out. They'll have their copy, and then the notary on our side, the NotaryPro team member, will have what's called a counterpart copy. So they'll have that document printed and ready to sign on the NotaryPro side. So what you end up with are two documents. They're identical, but when they are both validly signed via video conference, they become a legal complete will or power of attorney, or both. And then in addition to that, we also provide the affidavit of execution. So the paralegal notary, or sometimes a lawyer notary, will then commission the affidavit of execution. So that affidavit is actually the most important piece in some respects, because it is proof that your witnesses actually signed the will on the date that you signed the will. And so all of this was enabled by the Ontario government legislating this process under Ontario regulation. I think it was 12920 back in 2020, and it has since been baked into the Wills and Successions Act and the Substitute Decisions Act, which allows for wills and powers of attorney to be signed via video call. So this was a significant legislative change that the Ontario government allowed for during the pandemic, so that people could still sign their wills and powers of attorney, which unfortunately were really important at a time when people were, facing the prospect of contracting COVID, of course. So we're really excited about this, and I'll just quickly end by saying we've done hundreds and hundreds of wills and powers of attorneys over the last 3 years for clients all across Canada and primarily in Ontario. But we're really excited about that, and these documents are perfectly valid. They're just as good as you going and signing it with a neighbor or with a lawyer in person. So we're really excited to see where this goes.
Thanks, Rob. So I have a couple of questions that I think people might want to know. So I think traditionally people have thought of a witness as having to know who you are. As people talk about maybe even getting their friends or family members to serve as a witness. So I think two questions is, firstly, how does the person prove that they are who they are? And secondly, there's also a question about capacity, and whether the person has capacity to sign, or indeed whether they're being put under any kind of undue influence or things like that. So how do you manage that? And is it possible for you to say, you know what, we don't feel comfortable about this particular one, so I think you're better off meeting somebody in person?
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting variables that come into play when you're witnessing these critical life documents. So I think the first thing to note is the process itself is really only valid and legal in the province of Ontario currently. There are other provinces that allow for a version of this process, but it's actually quite different in terms of its end result. So what we're describing today is really only in Ontario. In terms of the witnesses, so the witnesses must be, by law, someone who is not identified as a beneficiary under your will. They also cannot be related to you in terms of the person signing their will, that what's called the testator. So There's rules there that when we go through our process, the witnesses are actually the Notary Pro employee and typically one of their family members. So we have the ability to have both witnesses handled by Notary Pro. So that's also, frankly, a pain point that we've eliminated by offering this service internally and through Notary Pro, rather than asking the clients to go and get a neighbor or someone down the street, or often we used to get colleagues in the office setting. And then in terms of
and actually, I mean, it does come up a lot that people say, but I don't want my friends to read my will. Like, this is a personal document. I don't really want one of my close associates to be signing my will. And if I don't let them read it, I'm asking them to sign a document that they haven't read, and people aren't comfortable doing that either, right? So we do hear a lot of these dynamics because we say, well, just hide the contents and get them to sign at the end. It's like, nobody's going to sign that and some people don't even feel comfortable having the responsibility of, like, I witnessed this. So some people say, no, thank you. I don't want to be a witness. I don't know what I'm letting myself in for when I sign up to be a witness. So it actually works well to have an independent witness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about the legal implications of witnessing a document. I know it personally, I've been a lawyer for 10 years now, and I've signed tens of thousands of documents over the years, probably in my capacity as a notary primarily. And I've had to answer that question many times, like, well, am I liable if I sign this document as a witness? And the answer is absolutely not. However, in the context of a will, you could, in theory, be called upon by a court, a probate court, to testify that, yes, indeed, you did witness that signature on that date for the deceased individual. And you may be asked to verify that at the time it seemed that they were of sound mind, that they had mental capacity to actually execute the document. So in terms of your question about confirming mental capacity, we do have a number of screening questions in the intake form that we're actually asking the client to confirm in advance. We also, during the initial meeting, we ask them to produce 2 forms of valid photo ID, non-expired photo ID. So if we encounter any little blips or little red flags during that screening phase, we do, not often, we have had to refuse service. We've also had a number of occasions, unfortunately, over the years where it was unclear who the other individual was with the given testator or grantor. So typically those were involving quite elderly individuals who were effectively being put before a webcam and we were being told that they were signing their will or their power of attorney. And so we have to be very careful because we are living in an era of the issue of elder abuse, of the issues of grandparent abuse, where a nephew or a niece may effectively try to create or concoct a scenario where they force their grandparents to sign over power of attorney for property in particular. And oftentimes those power of attorney documents have been very loosely drafted so that there's no conditional elements in them that would actually activate them. And so there would be, for example, powers of attorney where the individual, the grantor, is giving over total control over their finances, even though they are still completely of sound mind. And frankly, as a lawyer, that doesn't really make any sense unless there's a rational basis for someone to give up control over their finances and their property before they lose their mental capacity.
Or even conversely, they're signing a document once they've lost capacity and they're trying to convince you that they're good to sign,
Yep.
right? And that can happen as well, that and then signing everything over to one of their children at the detriment of the child's siblings who aren't involved in it as well. So I think what it really shows, I think, is that there is this signing process, I believe, is actually more open to undue process when it's all held within the family and the neighbors and everything else. But when you do get a third party, certainly a trained third party serving as the witness, then I think it guards against many of these situations that can occur when you've got a witness signing from down the street who they don't really know what they're signing or the implications of what they are signing. So maybe we could talk a little bit as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the specific process process by what's happening on the legal wills side. So what happens now is that a person can step through, prepare their will, and it takes about 20 minutes to half an hour. And then at the end, we're going to now say, you now have to print and sign this document. But if you do not have witnesses, there's a lot of people who do not have witnesses available. It's a one-button process. It's like, click here to summon, like summon your witnesses, get your witnesses online. And you click and you can schedule at some time to have that witness session. And then, as you mentioned, Rob, the document that you've prepared at Legal Wills is automatically uploaded to that witness, which is your team member at NotaryPro, who can then print it, and they're going to have it in front of them, an exact replica of the document that you're going to be signing at your end. And there's going to be two people at the other end, both serving as the witnesses, and one of them is licensed as a notary as well. So you would then just sign the document on camera, they would sign the other document on camera, and then it's mailed back to them and the two documents are attached together. So you really can, for the first time, what makes this actually revolutionary in Ontario is that you really can complete your legal document from start to finish, signed document, without leaving your room, which is huge for anybody with mobility issues, anybody with geographical challenges. I don't know whether that's an expression, but somebody living in remote parts of Ontario, and there are certainly some very remote parts of Ontario where you may not have access to a witness or certainly a notary or a legal professional. So you really can. You could be in a cabin in the woods somewhere in northern Ontario, and you can completely prepare your will.
Well, so, and if I can pick up on one thing, I know there's just a couple of details there that I think are really important. So the beauty of this process, as you sort of touched on, is that not only are you avoiding all these logistical hassles of finding someone in your community. For example, if you have any physical mobility issues, you don't know necessarily if you're going to find a law office or a notary office that has a wheelchair ramp or a button on the door so you can get in. So we've eliminated all of that. You're also eliminating some of the guesswork about, how is this supposed to look? And for example, do I initial the corners of the pages? Do I have to initial the signature page? Do I sign the back of the will? There's all these little intricacies that the trained professional on the NotaryPro team already knows because they've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So we're really eliminating all the guesswork in addition to all the convenience functions that you mentioned there.
You're absolutely right. Like paperclip or staple. How do I attach the pages together? And do I have to sign in blue pen or black pen? Like everybody's probably, no, not everybody, most people are doing this for the first time in their life. People will second guess, what they can and can't do. What size paper should it be on? Should it be double-sided or single-sided, and things like that. And they are things that do genuinely trip people up. So we've talked about how this is now, it's valid in Ontario. Now, I know that BC has its own special laws. They do electronic signing now, electronic storage of wills. So they're on a march to integrate new technologies. They're ahead of everybody else. I know Saskatchewan has just brought in some laws that I think that are similar to Ontario. But how do you see the legal landscape changing, say, over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the areas that NotaryPro as a company increasingly finds itself in terms of within the Canadian legal marketplace is we're now getting much closer to actually advocating for legislative and policy changes, because what we're seeing is there are different rules in each province. Even within the province, there's different rules between courthouses in terms of the acceptance of electronic signatures on things like the affidavits of execution. So we are, as a company, and this is by way sort of answering the broader question, as a company, we're actually beginning a much more concerted process of engaging the Ministry of the Attorney General, of engaging the Ministry of Finance, and saying, hey, nothing is being done consistently here across the board, and there's actually issues that are impacting Ontarians in a way that they really shouldn't have to deal with, because no one really has the time to read Ontario Regulation 12920 and actually understand it with any meaning. So that's what we do, right? So one of the things we're doing is basically saying there needs to be consistency. And we think within each of the different provinces, there should be a recognition of, for example, a virtually witnessed will in Ontario should be recognized by a court in Alberta, even though that process that we've just been describing for the last 20 minutes, even though that process is unique to Ontario, an Alberta court should be able to say, hey, that was valid in Ontario. Just because the individual maybe passed away here in Alberta, or maybe they spent their final years in Alberta, it should be acknowledged and accepted in the probate courts in Alberta or Saskatchewan. So we're pushing for that.
So Rob, so let me interrupt you. Would that not be the case now? Like if somebody created a virtually signed will now and then subsequently moved to Alberta, would their virtually signed will be accepted, or do we just not know?
No. So it's a great question. So we've only actually had one issue in the last year with respect to a document that was to be enforced in Manitoba. And we actually, ultimately, we just had to work through with the lawyer going through that probate process, say, here's the process in Ontario, here's how it looks, here's the Manitoba process. And then we had to make an adjustment on the affidavit of execution to reflect that. But those are the sort of the learnings that are now enforcing our position, which is the courts across Canada should really be aware of what is legal in the other provinces. Obviously, these processes are never going to come from the federal government. They don't legislate. They have no jurisdiction actually to legislate in these areas. However, what we see happening in the United States is the effective nationalization of some of the broader online notary rules. In particular, there's the Secure Notarization Act, which is working its way through Congress. I think it's now before the Senate. And so the United States in particular is, I would argue, leading the way in terms of pushing forward with more so pure innovation in the legal technology space, and ensuring that that country is ready for the broader shift to online services for some of these fundamental things like notarizing documents, including wills and power of attorney. So the long story short would be, we want to continue to push for that consistency across the country. And I do find it interesting and notable, of course, that BC is now has legalized e-signing wills and the digital storage of wills. And we'd like to see that in Ontario, to be honest.
Oh, we absolutely would. We can turn it on in an instant. As soon as Ontario passed the law, we're ready to go with it. Actually, so one final note actually is talking about powers of attorney in terms of inconsistencies. I mean, I think powers of attorney are almost more inconsistent because it relies on each financial institution accepting your document as well, right? So it's not necessarily just the probate court, but you need to take it to Royal Bank or Scotiabank or whatever with this document, and they've established their own rules for what will and will not be accepted as well. So
and that's where at the end of the day with these services, for us it's about the consistency of the service. So the process should look the same every single time, by reducing really any variables with that service delivery. We know as a company what is out there in the wild. So the powers of attorney that we've signed over the years, that again, we've never had anything come back in terms of issues with banks or with other institutions, primarily investment houses, or your Raymond James and Commonwealth Bank or that kind of stuff. So we know what the service looks like, and so we're really dedicated to providing that exceptional service, and that's reflected in the reviews on Trustpilot and Google for NotaryPro. So we are also engaging directly with the banks in particular on a number of fronts, but one of them is to ensure that their service reps or their tellers know what it looks like when they have a power of attorney that's before them that has two copies, and one is signed by the grantor and one is signed by the notary and the witnesses. Why is that the case? And so we've created a couple of custom stamps. They're just slightly out of reach here, but custom stamps that explain why this looks the way it does, and that's actually on the final product. And just something as small as that has gone a long way to reducing the headaches and the confusion down the line.
Thank you. That explains a lot. And actually, I have to congratulate you on your Trustpilot reviews. They are outstanding. It's like 4.9, 2,000 reviews or something. So that we aspire to be like Notary Pro, although ours aren't bad either. But that's one of the reasons why we like partnering with Notary Pro, because you're obviously hitting the mark with customers, and they are really appreciating the service that you offer. So I think with that, I mean, we're approaching the end of half an hour. I'm not sure if there's any questions from anybody who's on the call, but we are happy to take any questions.
I see a few paralegals have joined.
And maybe if there aren't any questions, maybe Rob, could you talk a little bit, maybe you could characterize the kinds of people who use virtual witnessing today. Who is it who's taken advantage of your service now?
Yeah, we have a pretty wide spectrum demographically. I'm getting the double audio again. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, totally wide spectrum demographically. I do think there's definitely a skew towards individuals who are sort of at the retirement phase of life. Obviously, they want to make sure that their affairs are in order. But what I do find interesting, and I would have to ask my colleague for maybe a little more of the specifics, but we definitely skew a little bit towards people who aren't in major cities. And I know this because of the addresses where we're often shipping the documents. And I think that's a testament to sort of the underlying problem of what we would call access to justice. In this case, it's not so much justice as just access to basic legal services. If you live in a small town or you live in the country, it really is kind of a pain to try to find a notary and actually get the document notarized. And that's where our online notary service comes in, as well as our virtual witnessing service. So that would be
plus of course pricing is not necessarily, if you only have one notary in your town, that notary is going to potentially overcharge for that service as well, right?
And that's also, again, just to kind of plug a little bit of how we operate, but we have standardized pricing coast to coast to coast across Canada. So any location you ever go into, it will be the same service fee no matter what the document, well, depending on the document, but no matter which location you go to. And that's partly what drives a lot of those great reviews, is people know what they're going to get every time they interact with Notary Pro.
And just, you've touched on one final point, is that virtual witnessing is not required. You don't have to do all of this virtually. Yeah. You also offer in-person across Canada as well, right? So I think that's an important point to note. And we certainly still link through to Notary Pro. If you do want to get your documents witnessed and notarized, you can always walk into an office and part of your network of notaries across the country.
That's correct. Yeah, you can absolutely do in person, and a lot of people prefer that. At the end of the day, they just want to have the single copy with the signatures on both signatures on the same copy. So of course, that remains a really strong option, and we do have over 275 locations now across Canada. So you should be able to find one near you. If you don't, let us know. We'll try to find a notary to join our network.
Very good. Well, with that, Rob, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me. These sessions are always so informative, so useful for me and hopefully everybody who's joined us today. So thank you, and hopefully we can do another one of these soon. I know that recently you were talking about the advances of AI in the legal community. Yeah. So I'd be interested to do a follow-on, and maybe we could talk about that and the impact of that on the work that you're doing and the work that we're doing as well.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah, let's set that up. Sounds great. Thank you, Tim.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Sounds great. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.